Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Which graphics card should you buy? The NVidia GT 1030 or the AMD RX 550? These are under $100 graphics cards. They are very competitive in terms of price to performance. I will have 9 games benchmarked later in this video with charts as well as price to performance, and then a suggestion on perhaps a better choice, namely those two cards back there, the GTX 1050 and the RX 560. I have previously reviewed the RX 550 way back at launch with the launch drivers. Link to that down in the description below, but this is the first time the GT 1030 is on my desk. Now, links to Amazon and Newegg for both of these cards will be down in the video description below. At the moment, you can find the GT 1030, at least when I'm recording this video, for about $67. The RX 550 is a little bit more at $85. Both cards have a reason to exist and offer something for the money. Which one you might consider buying depends upon what games you want to play and what kind of monitor you have. One of the biggest differences at this level between the cards is FreeSync support. If you have an inexpensive FreeSync monitor, and they really do come pretty inexpensive these days, you might consider the RX 550 in order to have the adaptive sync technology so that the refresh rate of your monitor is variable and adapts to the game that you're playing, especially on low-end systems. It matters maybe a little bit less on high-end systems, but on an inexpensive card like this, it can make a difference. NVIDIA does have their G-Sync, but you're not going to be plugging a G-Sync monitor into this. That costs too much. And one final point, all of the 1030s have 2 GB of VRAM. The RX 550 comes in both 4 and 2 GB versions. Now, I actually have a 4 GB card here. Please don't buy one. Buy a 2 GB card. This is what AMD sent me. Thank you, AMD. But don't buy a 4 GB card. It's wasted on a card of this performance level. So all the links down below will be to the 2 GB card. There is absolutely zero game performance difference between the 2 and 4 GB card at this level. Now, before I talk about gaming anymore, because really gaming immediately leads to those two cards back there, the GTX 1050 and the RX 560, let me talk about non-gaming uses for a minute, because really these cards are primarily aimed at non-gaming rather than gaming. They will game, and in fact, you'll see in a minute they game just fine in some titles. But I would like to point out that the primary reason these cards exist is for home theater PCs. HDMI 2.0 support, 4K support, multiple monitor support, hardware video decoding support, especially with 4K video. These contain technologies that are missing on many integrated graphics chips. Now, it is true that the latest and greatest integrated graphics on Intel's side with the newest processors does have 4K video decode, but the older ones don't, or it uses up more of its performance. And so one of the benefits of these cards is if you're putting together a non-gaming home theater PC or a media consumption PC, it offers you things like HDMI 2.0 that you're not going to get. Even the latest Intel chips still don't offer that. Content and media creation. Are you looking for a card that will assist you doing video encoding, 3D animation, etc.? Now, if you're a professional doing serious work, you should have more card than this. But the truth of the matter is, for light work in those departments, any video card is a benefit. In something like Adobe Premiere Pro, for example, having any NVIDIA or any AMD graphics card does boost the render performance and does boost the effect performance versus using integrated graphics. Now, many of the effects are not GPU accelerated. It depends entirely upon what you're doing. But if you know who you are and you know what you need, you may find that simply adding a basic graphics card provides a substantial boost to that performance, and adding more graphics card actually doesn't make that much of a difference. You may notice here I have an Acer Aspire pre-built desktop on the desk. This is actually the computer that both of these cards were tested in, and it's the sort of machine that you'd put these into. If you have some fancy high-end custom-built machine, you're probably buying a nicer graphics card. But if you have something like this, which is available in the $400 to $450 price range with, say, an i5 processor or a Ryzen 5 processor, these can be a value-add option for somebody on a tight budget looking to play esports games. Now, be cautious that these sorts of machines can be picky about what graphics card you install them in. They often have lower end power supplies and lower end motherboards and won't necessarily take a high power graphics card without a bunch of upgrades, hence the benefit of these. Now, those two cards back there also work fine in this machine, but this is an i5 7400. This is a Kaby Lake 7th generation machine. If you go back a few years, you can find some really good deals on i5 2400 and 3450 machines, especially Dell Optiplexes are quite common on eBay. I've talked about those and done videos on those in the past. I do caution you that in older machines, especially business class such as Dell Optiplex machines, the NVIDIA cards have better compatibility than the AMDs do. The AMD is great because it has FreeSync, which NVIDIA lacks. But I've had problems installing AMD RX cards in my older Dell Optiplex machines. Not the newer ones, but the 5- and 6-year-old machines have had problems. Some of the PCI Express slots wouldn't take them and they would not boot with an RX card, whereas they boot just fine with the NVIDIA card. So my general across-the-board advice, if you have a 5- or 6-year-old pre-built from Dell, Lenovo, HP, etc., buy the NVIDIA card, regardless of any other factors. You're going to have a better chance of success and compatibility. I've had too many problems with RX cards in 5- and 6-year-old machines. New machines, even budget pre-built such as this, and the new Dell Inspirons, the RX works just fine, and it's a great choice, especially if you have a FreeSync monitor. Let me come back to gaming for a minute. GTX 1050 and RX 560 back there. If you've got the money, they're a better choice for gaming if your computer will take them. They perform much, much quicker than these cards. As I said before, these are not really meant for gaming. Let me give you a specific example. Ghost Recon Wildlands 1080p low detail preset, 36 frames per second. 65 frames per second on that 1050 back there. Yes, the 1050 costs more, I understand that, but that particular card requires no PCI Express power cable and works fine in a pre-built such as this. It also works fine in the 5-year-old Dell Optiplexes off of eBay. I've done numerous videos on that, and it is substantially faster. Not quite twice as fast, but going from 36 frames per second to 65 is a dramatic performance increase. There are similar but slightly smaller performance differences between an RX 550 and a GTX 1060. Now there is a whole slew of videos on my channel comparing the 1050 and the RX 560, so I'm not going to repeat those here. This is about these cards. But just be aware that from a price to performance point of view and from a raw playability point of view, those cards are usually a much better deal, and I would recommend you consider them. I will link to those down further in the description below as well. That being said, if you only want to play Counter-Strike Global Offensive, Overwatch, League of Legends, Dota 2, World of Tanks, if you're not going to be playing Ghost Recon Wildlands, check out the benchmarks that will be linked in the playlist in the description below over on Tech Deals Gaming. Now, the 9 games I'm showing you here today are built-in benchmarks, Ghost Recon Wildlands, that kind of thing. Not really the games these are meant for. Why are those benchmarks on my gaming channel? Because they're live gameplay. Overwatch, for example, doesn't have a built-in benchmark, so it requires a live gameplay video, which would make this too long. All of those kind of games play just fine on these cards. In fact, Counter-Strike Global Offensive averages around 200 frames a second at low detail. A little bit faster on the RX 550, but it's still about 180 frames per second on the GT 1030. Now, that's at 1080p. It is at low detail, but if you want to play games like that on a budget, it really is all that you need, and it is dramatically superior to most integrated graphics. So if you would like to see esports tests, that's on the gaming channel in the playlist down below. Be sure you're subscribed to the Tech Deals Gaming channel because I will have the first one published and ready to go when this video goes live, and then I will publish the rest over the next week or so. On Tech Deals Gaming, it works a bit different. On the main hardware channel, 1 video, 9 games tested, all built-in benchmarks. On the gaming channel, every game gets its own video, and you can actually see the in-depth gameplay if you want to see the live performance of the play and then the real-time numbers in the upper corner of the screen. Now I want to talk about the test setup, RAM, storage, CPU, etc. I would like to point out that there will be 2 timestamps down in the description below. The first is going to take you to the benchmark charts. If you want to skip all of the actual benchmark footage, you can certainly do so and go straight to the benchmark charts. Then I'll have my conclusion at the end of the video. I did leave the entirety of the built-in benchmarks of all 9 games, so it does make it a little bit longer. I set it to music. You can watch it or skip it as you wish. But the real-time performance of the MSI Afterburner numbers will be up on the screen in the green letters so that you can see the actual benchmarks running in real time. And then the charts, of course, as well as the dollar cost per frame per second chart at the end, and then the results. Now the test setup, as I said before, is this Acer Aspire T pre-built computer. It retails for $450 and it has an Intel Core i5 7400 CPU. 4 cores, 4 threads, up to 3.5 gigahertz. Now that's running at completely stock speeds with a base of 3.0 and a turbo of 3.5. It's a pre-built, there's no overclocking in this. Now this system normally comes with 8 gigabytes of system RAM. I have upgraded it to 16 because frankly, almost everything I test is upgraded to 16 gigs of RAM. And I also have a solid state drive installed in here, although the games were not on the SSD. Those are actually on my external test drive. And then each of these cards was installed. I do completely remove the drivers between the tests, between the two cards, using Display Driver Uninstaller. I recommend you use it as well if you have to switch between brands to make sure you remove all traces of the various drivers. And with that being said, I'm now going to present to you the entirety of all 9 game built-in benchmarks. Now, the timestamp both on the video and in the description below will jump you ahead to the charts and to the end of the video if you at any point want to skip the rest of the benchmarks. Enjoy! Now this chart deserves some commentary. This is all 9 games averaged for the average frame rate between the two cards. The GT 1030 averaged just under 47 frames per second across all 9 games. The RX 550 averaged almost 55 frames per second. So it's nearly 10 frames per second faster in average on the RX 550 versus the GT 1030. Now please note that all but one of these games were run at low detail at 1080p. Tomb Raider was run at high because that game is now 4 years old and actually shows that 4-year-old and older games will actually run at high detail on these cards. But the reality is, for casual gaming, they do the job, but not very well. If you watch the minimum, the 1% and 0.1% minimums, many of these games dip down into the 30s and below, even on the lowest detail setting. Now this is at 1080p resolution. If you're okay to drop the resolution down to 720p or 900p, you'll get better performance than this. However, as I said before, if you really want to play these games, the GTX 1050 and the RX 560 are much better choices for your money. While it is true that the RX 550 is faster than the GT 1030, when you take price into account, it actually is a worse value for the money unless you have a FreeSync monitor. $1.43 per frame per second for the $67 1030 and $1.55 per frame per second for the $85 RX 550. So here, lower is better. You're paying less money per frame per second with the GT 1030, but of course you're getting lower total frame rate. If you want closer to that 60 frames per second, but for whatever reason can't get a 560 or GTX 1050, then the RX 550 might make sense. Or also if you have a FreeSync monitor. But if you want the value option here, if you want performance for the dollar, the GT 1030 is the better deal, at least in these 9 games. Well, there you have it for the benchmark numbers, the results, and the charts. The real question is, what do I recommend? Now that's a little bit more complicated because it's nuanced based upon your situation, what computer and what monitor that you have. Now I mentioned this earlier in the video, I'm going to mention it again. From a dollar cost per frame per second, the GT 1030 is less expensive per frame rendered than the RX 550. But that goes away somewhat if you have a FreeSync monitor and you want to use FreeSync. While this costs a bit more, being able to use the adaptive sync technology and have your frame rates vary with the monitor and the card and have them talk to each other, that's a benefit. You don't get that with the NVIDIA card. So if you have a FreeSync and you don't mind paying the extra money, get an RX 550. Now that assumes that you have a computer that likes this. Also, as I said before, if you have an older machine, a Dell Optiplex or a Lenovo from 5 or 6 years ago, this may or may not work in them. I've had nothing but trouble putting RX cards into older machines. The newer ones, the Dell Inspiron, the Acer Aspire, the Asus pre-built, the MC32, work absolutely wonderful with both of these cards. But if you've got an older machine such as that, get the NVIDIA card for much better compatibility. Now, all of this assumes that you don't skip both of these cards, and as I said earlier in the video, just step up to the RX 560 and GTX 1050. Now, those cost between $110 to $120 when I'm filming this video at the end of September 2017, which currently puts the RX 560 not that much more expensive than the RX 550. But it does put the GTX 1050 noticeably more expensive than a GT 1030. And this is where we come back to the point where, had I reviewed this when it launched, I would have given it a not recommended. Because this card launched at $80. In fact, I paid $85 for this card when it launched. And the card back there was $99 at launch. Yes, everything's gone up a little bit except for this. Currently, on Newegg and Amazon, you'll pay about $120 for a GTX 1050. If you can find one for less, great. The links are down below. But on the day I filmed this was $67, and that was $120. Yes, it's faster, and yes, if you're playing AAA games, you'll need it. But if you're only going to be playing esports games, this is really all you need. I mentioned before Counter-Strike Global Offensive. This will do about 180 frames per second at 1080p low detail in Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Now, if you want high detail, okay, fine, that. But if you're on a budget for $67, that's a lot of value for the money. Thank you so much for watching. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below this video. Questions and comments in the comment section, and as always, check out the links in the video description. Links to my Twitter, Twitch, and Patreon account are down there. If you can support me, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much. Links to Amazon and Newegg for these cards, those cards, and this machine will be down there as well. Please use those links when shopping. I would greatly appreciate it. And then finally, the link to my original review of this and the link to the playlist over on Tech Deals Gaming will be down there as well, so you can see League of Legends, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, Overwatch, World of Tanks, World of Warships, and others tested on these cards. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.